Imagine the cool hush of dawn in an opulent Greek villa, marble floors gleaming beneath the first rays of sunlight. The air is heavy with the scent of olive oil and incense, and the distant laughter of noblemen echoes through columned halls. Servants move quietly, their eyes lowered, as the city outside stirs to life. But behind the grandeur and order, another world exists, a world of secrets, shadows, and silent suffering. In a small, windowless chamber, a young boy sits alone, his body draped in fine linen but his spirit weighed down by fear and uncertainty. He is a concubine, chosen not for his birth or his deeds, but for the beauty of his youth and the whims of those in power. His days are spent in service, his nights at the mercy of masters whose desires are law. Every gesture, every word, is measured. A single mistake could mean punishment, disgrace, or worse. The villa's marble walls, meant to protect and impress, have become his prison. Outside, the world sees only the splendor of Greek civilization, its art, its philosophy, its legendary heroes. But within these walls, the cost of that splendor is paid in silence and shame. What was it like to live as a male concubine in ancient Greece? What dreams were sacrificed? What pain endured? And what hope clung to in the darkness? As we step into the shadows beneath the marble, prepare to uncover a story rarely told. A story of power, exploitation, and the resilience of the human spirit. And if you think you know the glories of ancient Greece, what comes next may change everything. To understand the tragic fate of male concubines, we must first step into the world that created them, a world dazzling in its achievements, yet shadowed by rigid hierarchies and unspoken rules. Ancient Greece was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own customs, but united by a shared reverence for beauty, intellect, and the pursuit of excellence. Marble temples soared above bustling agoras, philosophers debated the nature of virtue, and poets sang of gods and heroes. Yet beneath this cultural brilliance lay a society obsessed with status, power, and control. Greek society was built on a strict hierarchy. At the top stood freeborn male citizens, landowners, warriors, and lawmakers who shaped the destiny of their city-states. Below them were women, foreigners, and slaves, each group confined to roles that served the ambitions of the elite. Gender was not simply a matter of biology, but a social script, dictating every aspect of life. Men were expected to be strong, rational, and dominant. Women, by contrast, were relegated to the private sphere, their value measured in chastity and obedience. Yet, the boundaries of desire were far more fluid than the laws that governed them. In the symposiums, exclusive gatherings where wine flowed and intellects clashed, men formed intimate bonds with younger males, relationships that blended mentorship, affection, and eroticism. These connections, celebrated in art and literature, were seen as a path to virtue and wisdom, but only when they followed strict social codes. The older lover, or erastes, was to guide and protect. The younger beloved, or ereminos, was to submit and learn. When these roles blurred, or when desire crossed the boundaries of age, class, or consent, the consequences could be devastating. It was within this context that the institution of male concubinage flourished. Boys and young men, often slaves or war captives, were prized for their beauty and pliability. They were bought, sold, and gifted among the elite, their bodies commodified in a society that valued youth and submission. Unlike the celebrated ereminos, the concubine had no choice, no hope of social advancement, and no protection from abuse. His existence was a paradox. Desired and despised, pampered and powerless, visible only as an object of pleasure or a symbol of status, the presence of male concubines was both a symptom and a tool of power. For the master, to possess such a companion was a mark of wealth and sophistication. For the concubine, it was a sentence to a life lived in the shadows. The rules of Greek society, so clear in public, became murky in the private chambers of the powerful. Here, the lines between love, exploitation, and violence blurred, and the suffering of the vulnerable was hidden behind closed doors. As we move deeper into this world, we begin to see how the values of ancient Greece, its worship of beauty, its obsession with hierarchy, its complex attitudes toward desire, created the perfect conditions for the tragedy of the male concubine. And as we turn to the next chapter, we'll witness how boys were swept into this system, their fates sealed by forces far beyond their control. The journey into concubinage for many boys in ancient Greece began not with choice, but with catastrophe. Some were the spoils of war, children torn from burning cities, their families slaughtered or scattered as Greek armies swept through rival lands. Others were born into slavery, the sons of women who had themselves been captured or sold. Still others were victims of poverty, sold by desperate parents who could no longer feed them, or abandoned to the slave markets in hopes that someone, anyone, might offer them a better fate. For these boys, childhood ended abruptly, replaced by a world of fear, uncertainty, and loss. The trauma of separation was immediate and profound. One day, a boy might be playing in the dusty streets of his village. The next he was shackled and marched in a line of captives, his home receding into memory. The slave markets of Athens, Corinth, and other great cities were bustling, chaotic places, filled with the cries of the desperate and the calculating gaze of buyers. Here, boys were inspected like livestock, stripped, prodded, and paraded before potential masters. Their youth and beauty became their only currency, and the more striking their features, the higher the price they fetched. The process of being chosen was both humiliating and terrifying. Elite households sent trusted agents or even family members to select new concubines, seeking boys who fit the prevailing ideals of beauty: smooth skin, large eyes, delicate features, and a certain vulnerability that promised pliability. The chosen were often given new names, their pasts erased as they were absorbed into the machinery of the household. For some, this meant a life of relative comfort, fine clothes, good food, and a place in the master's retinue. For most, it meant a life of constant vigilance, their bodies and spirits at the mercy of those who owned them. The psychological toll of this transition was immense. The boys were forced to adapt quickly, learning the rules of a new world where a misstep could mean punishment or worse. They were taught to serve, to please, to anticipate the desires of their masters. Any sign of resistance or sorrow was dangerous, a reminder that their fate was not their own. The trauma of separation from family and the loss of identity haunted them, manifesting in nightmares, anxiety, and a deep, abiding loneliness. Yet, even in this darkness, some boys clung to hope for kindness, for escape, or for a future beyond the walls of their gilded prisons. But for most, the reality was a life lived in the shadows, their suffering hidden behind the marble facades of Greek civilization. As we move forward, we'll step into the daily routines and hidden agonies of these boys, revealing the true cost of their beauty and the price of survival in a world that saw them as little more than possessions. For the male concubine, each day began before the sun rose over the tiled roofs of the villa. He was awakened by the soft footsteps of other servants, the air still cool and heavy with the scent of last night's incense. His first duty was to attend to his master's needs, fetching water for washing, preparing scented oils, and laying out the day's garments. Every movement was measured, every word carefully chosen. A misplaced glance or a moment's hesitation could draw a sharp rebuke, a slap, or worse. The concubine's world was one of constant vigilance, where the smallest error could have outsized consequences. His duties extended far beyond the bedchamber. He was expected to serve at the table, pour wine at the symposium, and entertain guests with music, poetry, or dance. In public, he was a symbol of his master's wealth and taste, his beauty and obedience on display for all to see. In private, he was a confidant, a plaything, and sometimes a scapegoat for his master's frustrations. The boundaries of his role were never clear, shifting with the moods and desires of those in power. He learned to read faces, to anticipate needs, to disappear when danger loomed. Restrictions shaped every aspect of his existence. He could not leave the villa without permission, and even within its walls, his movements were closely monitored. He was forbidden to speak freely, to form close friendships, or to show any sign of defiance. The other servants, themselves wary of punishment, kept their distance, and the concubine's isolation deepened. He was both visible and invisible, paraded before guests, yet never truly seen as a person. His body was not his own, and his thoughts were a private refuge he dared not share. The threat of violence was ever present. A master's displeasure could mean a beating, confinement, or public humiliation. Some concubines were branded or marked to prevent escape, their bodies bearing the scars of ownership. Sexual violence was a constant risk, and the fear of being discarded for a younger, more beautiful boy haunted every waking moment. The concubine's value was tied to his youth and appearance, and as he aged, he faced the prospect of being sold, abandoned, or forced into harsher labor. The psychological toll was immense. Many concubines developed strategies for survival, emotional detachment, feigned obedience, or the cultivation of small pleasures in music, art, or fleeting moments of kindness. Some found solace in the routines of service, the predictability of daily tasks offering a fragile sense of control. Others retreated into themselves, their spirits battered by years of exploitation and fear. The constant need to perform, to please, to survive, left deep wounds that never fully healed. Yet, even in this world of shadows, there were moments of resilience and quiet rebellion. Some concubines formed secret bonds with others, sharing whispered stories and stolen comforts. A few managed to win the genuine affection of their masters, gaining small privileges or a measure of protection. But for most, life was a delicate balancing act, a daily negotiation between hope and despair. As the sun set and the villa grew quiet, the concubine's day ended as it began, in service, in silence, and in the shadow of power. The marble walls that enclosed him were both a shield and a prison, their beauty a constant reminder of the price he paid for survival. And as we turn to the next chapter, we'll see how the very qualities that made these boys desirable, youth, beauty, and vulnerability, became both their greatest asset and their greatest curse. In the opulent world of ancient Greece, beauty was a double-edged sword, especially for the male concubine. His youth and appearance were his currency, the very traits that determined his fate. Masters and guests alike would comment on the curve of his cheek, the clarity of his skin, the grace of his movements. He was paraded at feasts and gatherings, dressed in fine linen or even adorned with jewelry, a living ornament meant to impress and arouse envy. For a brief time, this attention could bring small privileges, better food, softer bedding, or a place closer to the master's side. Some concubines were even taught music, poetry, or dance, their talents cultivated to enhance their allure. But this privilege was always precarious, balanced on the knife edge of desire. The concubine's value was not in his mind or spirit, but in the fleeting perfection of his body. Every day he was measured against the next new arrival, the next beautiful boy brought into the household. A single blemish, a growth spurt, or the first signs of maturity could mean a sudden fall from favor. The constant scrutiny bred anxiety and self-doubt, as the concubine learned to see himself through the eyes of others, never as a person, always as a possession. This objectification was not just social, but deeply psychological. The concubine's sense of self became entangled with his appearance, his worth reduced to the approval of those who owned him. Compliments felt like lifelines, while criticism cut deep. Some boys tried to maintain their beauty at any cost, enduring painful grooming rituals or even risking dangerous treatments to preserve their looks. Others withdrew, numbing themselves to the constant pressure and the knowledge that their time in the spotlight was limited. Yet, the very qualities that brought privilege also brought peril. Jealousy and rivalry simmered beneath the surface, as other concubines or even legitimate family members saw the favored boy as a threat. Rumors and accusations could spread quickly, and a single misstep might lead to punishment or disgrace. The master's affection was fickle, and the line between pleasure and violence was thin. Some concubines were subjected to possessiveness, isolation, or even brutal displays of control meant to remind them of their place. And always, the shadow of the future loomed. What would happen when beauty faded? What fate awaited those who were no longer desired? The answers were rarely kind. Some were sold to harsher masters, others forced into menial labor, and a few simply cast out, left to survive on the streets with nothing but memories of a gilded cage. The price of beauty was not just the pain of the present, but the uncertainty of what came next. As we move forward, we'll see how the search for affection and belonging could lead to both moments of tenderness and acts of betrayal, reminding us that even in the most gilded prisons, the human heart still yearns for connection, and the cost of love can be as high as the cost of beauty. Within the marble walls of the Greek villa, The life of a male concubine was shaped not only by power and beauty, but by the tangled web of human relationships. The master's affection could be a blessing or a curse, and the line between love and possession was always blurred. Some concubines, desperate for protection or a sense of belonging, learned to read their master's moods, offering laughter, comfort, or even genuine tenderness in hopes of softening a hard heart. In rare cases, a true bond might form, one that offered fleeting moments of warmth and safety, a secret world carved out from the cold logic of ownership. But such bonds were always dangerous. The master's favor was a coveted prize, and other concubines or household members watched with envy and suspicion. A favored boy might find himself the target of whispered rumors, subtle sabotage, or outright hostility. Jealousy simmered beneath the surface, and alliances shifted with the master's changing desires. Even the legitimate wife or children could become rivals, resenting the attention and resources lavished on a beautiful outsider. The concubine, caught in the crossfire, learned to trust no one fully, his heart guarded even in moments of apparent intimacy. Betrayal was a constant risk. A careless word, a perceived slight, or a moment of vulnerability could be twisted into a weapon. Some concubines, seeking to improve their own standing, would betray a rival to the master, inventing stories of disloyalty or disrespect. Others, driven by desperation, might attempt to escape or form forbidden attachments with servants or even guests, acts that, if discovered, could lead to brutal punishment or exile. The fear of exposure haunted every relationship, turning even the smallest gesture of kindness into a potential liability. Yet, despite the risks, the need for connection persisted. In the quiet hours of the night, concubines might share whispered stories, stolen glances, or brief touches that spoke of longing and solidarity. These moments of human contact were lifelines, reminders that they were more than possessions, that their suffering was seen and understood by someone else. For some, these bonds offered hope. For others, they became the source of their greatest pain when inevitably broken by the demands of power and survival. The master, too, was not immune to the complexities of these relationships. Some were genuinely affectionate, even protective, while others wielded love as a tool of control, alternating between tenderness and cruelty to keep their concubines off balance. The unpredictability of the master's favor kept everyone in a state of anxious anticipation, never knowing when affection might turn to anger, or when a rival might seize the upper hand. In this world of forbidden bonds, every relationship was a gamble, every act of trust a risk. The price of love could be as high as the price of beauty, and the consequences of betrayal could be swift and severe. As we move into the next chapter, we'll see how the public shame and private pain of concubinage left scars that lasted long after the marble walls had crumbled, shaping the lives and memories of those who survived. For the male concubine, the agony of daily life was compounded by a deeper, more insidious wound, the shame that clung to his very existence. In the eyes of Greek society, he was both an object of desire and a symbol of disgrace. To be a concubine was to be marked, not just as a slave, but as someone whose body had been claimed and used, whose boundaries had been erased by the will of another. Even as he was paraded at feasts and admired for his beauty, whispers followed him like a shadow. He was never allowed to forget that he was less than a citizen, less than a man. The stigma was relentless. Freeborn Greeks prided themselves on self-control, autonomy, and honor. The concubine, by contrast, was seen as passive, vulnerable, and tainted by submission. His presence at public events was tolerated only as a display of his master's wealth and power, never as a person in his own right. If he dared to speak out of turn, to show pride or independence, he risked ridicule or punishment. Even after his youth faded and his service ended, the stain of concubinage lingered. Few would trust him with responsibility, and many would shun him entirely, fearing the contamination of his shame. This social death was mirrored by a profound psychological toll. The concubine learned to internalize the contempt of others, to see himself as unworthy of respect or love. He became adept at hiding his pain, presenting a mask of obedience and composure while his spirit withered beneath the weight of humiliation. The constant tension between being desired and despised left deep scars, anxiety, self-doubt, and a gnawing sense of isolation. Even small acts of kindness could feel like traps, reminders that affection was always conditional, always at risk of being withdrawn. The paradox was cruel. The very qualities that made the concubine valuable, his beauty, his youth, his ability to please, were the same qualities that condemned him to a life of suspicion and exclusion. He was never allowed to forget that he was property, not person, spectacle, not citizen. The fear of public exposure haunted every moment, and the knowledge that his fate could change with a single rumor or accusation kept him in a state of perpetual anxiety. Yet, even in this world of shame and silence, some concubines found ways to resist. A few managed to carve out small spaces of dignity, to form secret alliances, or to reclaim their stories in the face of erasure. But for most, the struggle was unending, a battle not just for survival, but for the right to be remembered as more than a shadow in someone else's story. What happened to those who dared to fight back, to escape, or to demand more? The answer is as tragic as it is revealing, and in the next chapter, we'll uncover the acts of defiance and the high price paid by those who refused to accept their fate. In the suffocating confines of the Greek villa, hope was a dangerous thing. Yet for some male concubines, the urge to reclaim their dignity, to resist, to escape, to be more than a possession, proved irresistible. Their stories, though rarely celebrated, are woven through the shadows of history, testaments to the indomitable human spirit and the terrible risks of defiance. Some concubines plotted their escape in secret, watching for moments when the household was distracted by festivals or the master's absence. A few managed to slip away under cover of darkness, blending into the city's labyrinthine streets or seeking refuge among sympathetic slaves. The price of freedom, however, was steep. Runaways were hunted relentlessly, and the penalty for recapture was brutal: public beatings, branding, or even death. The fear of betrayal was constant, as fellow slaves, hoping to curry favor or avoid suspicion, might reveal escape plans to the master. Others chose resistance from within. Some concubines refused to submit quietly, meeting their master's demands with silence or open defiance. A few used their intelligence and charm to manipulate household politics, turning rivalries to their advantage or sowing discord among their oppressors. These acts of rebellion, though small, were acts of self-assertion, a way to reclaim a measure of control in a world designed to strip it away. But resistance came at a cost. Defiant concubines were often singled out for harsher treatment, isolated from others, or subjected to humiliating punishments meant to break their will. There were rare stories of concubines who found allies among the freeborn, philosophers, poets, or even sympathetic masters who helped them gain manumission, a legal release from bondage. For these few, freedom was bittersweet. The stigma of their past followed them, and the struggle to build a new life in a society that viewed them with suspicion was daunting. Still, their stories stand as proof that escape, though perilous, was not impossible. Most, however, met tragic ends. Some died young, their bodies worn out by abuse, illness, or despair. Others, discarded when their beauty faded, were sold into harsher forms of labor or left to fend for themselves on the streets. A few, unable to bear the weight of shame and isolation, took their own lives. Their names were rarely recorded, their stories lost to the silence of history. Yet, even in tragedy, there is meaning. The acts of defiance, no matter how small, were acts of humanity. Reminders that even in the darkest circumstances, the desire for freedom and dignity endures. These stories force us to confront the true cost of exploitation and the resilience required to resist it. But what became of these men after their usefulness ended? How did history remember or erase them? In the next section, we'll explore the legacy of silence that surrounds the lives of male concubines, and why their suffering has been so easily forgotten. As centuries passed, the voices of male concubines faded into the background of Greek history, their stories buried beneath layers of myth, pride, and selective memory. Ancient chroniclers, almost always freeborn men, had little interest in preserving the experiences of those deemed shameful or marginal. When concubines did appear in the records, it was often as nameless figures, objects of scandal, cautionary tales, or mere footnotes in the lives of their masters. Their suffering was minimized, their agency denied, and their humanity obscured by euphemism or outright omission. This erasure was not accidental. Greek society, so proud of its achievements in art, philosophy, and democracy, was deeply invested in maintaining a narrative of virtue and order. The existence of male concubinage, its violence, its exploitation, its psychological toll, did not fit the heroic self-image that later generations wanted to remember. As a result, the pain and resistance of these boys was quietly swept aside, replaced by sanitized stories of noble love or the glories of the symposium. Even modern historians, seduced by the grandeur of ancient Greece, have often overlooked or downplayed the realities of concubinage, focusing instead on the achievements of the powerful. The consequences of this silence are profound. Without names, without stories, the concubines of ancient Greece became invisible, their suffering unacknowledged and their resilience uncelebrated. Their erasure is a warning, a reminder of how easily the pain of the vulnerable can be forgotten when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable to remember. It also raises urgent questions for us today. Whose stories are we still overlooking? What truths are we still hiding behind the marble facades of our own societies? As we approach the end of this journey, the silence surrounding male concubines challenges us to look deeper, to question the histories we inherit, and to seek out the voices that have been lost. In our final reflection, we'll explore what their forgotten lives can teach us about power, identity, and the ongoing struggle for dignity in a world that too often prefers to look away. The story of the male concubine in ancient Greece is not just a tale of the distant past. It is a mirror, reflecting the ways power can shape, distort, and sometimes destroy the lives of the vulnerable. Behind the marble columns and golden myths, we find real people. Boys who were loved and used, envied and despised, remembered and erased. Their suffering was not an accident of history, but the inevitable result of a world that valued beauty and obedience over autonomy and dignity. The scars they carried, on their bodies, in their hearts, and across the centuries, remind us that the cost of survival in such a world is always paid in silence, shame, and lost potential. Yet, even in the darkest corners of history, there is resilience. The concubines who endured, who resisted, who found moments of connection or hope, challenge us to see the full complexity of the human spirit. Their stories, though nearly lost, urge us to look beyond the surface of power and privilege, to question the systems that demand such sacrifices, and to honor those who have been forced to live in the shadows. Today, the forms of exploitation may have changed, but the struggle for dignity and recognition continues. By remembering the forgotten, by telling the stories that history tried to erase, we reclaim a measure of justice, not just for the concubines of ancient Greece, but for all who have suffered in silence. In the end, the true legacy of these lives is not found in the ruins of villas or the lines of old texts, but in our willingness to bear witness, to learn, and to refuse to look away.